Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It has been a pretty good minute since I posted anything here, and there is a reason behind it, but I won't get into that here in this video, but instead I'll be making a sort of draw with me type of video so I can catch you guys up to speed. For now, I just want to get back into the groove of posting and finally put this video out. With that being said, today I'm continuing the process of turning my Animal Crossing villagers from New Horizons into human versions of themselves, and sharing the process of how I made each of their artworks. If you missed the last video, there will be a link in the iCard above, and I'll also have a playlist on the end screen of this video so you can check out the other characters I've made. So finally, after all this time, we get to Curlos. Curlos is a smug sheep villager, and he was actually the first villager I had visit my campsite within the game. And to be honest, I wasn't too excited to see him whenever he showed up. I thought he looked pretty plain, and I think if the game would have let me pass on him, I probably would have. But I think that would have been a mistake, because honestly having him on my island has been really nice. He's one of the 3 smug villagers that I have, so I'm glad I kept him. His home is decorated to look very warm and inviting, almost like he's, having a party or something. And that's honestly kind of how I picture him, just very chill and laid back, but he may be the one inviting people over to his house and kind of throwing these little mini parties. He just wants everyone to have fun and just kind of enjoy themselves on the island. As for his design, there really isn't too much to him. I think his most distinctive feature is probably just his striped sweater that he wears, and probably his really thick bushy eyebrows. I knew I wanted to incorporate those things within the design, and since his name is Curlos, I thought giving him curly hair would also be a really good design choice, so you'll see me play with those 3 features within the sketching phase. And I only did one sketch traditionally, but it was basically just trying to come up with ideas and incorporating those 3 elements that I wanted to be in his design. I also ended up trying to give him some facial hair, a little bit of a mustache and a beard because I thought that would suit him. As for my digital sketches, it was more about just figuring out the face shape, trying to figure out how to draw the curly hair again, because I tried to do that previously with Dom's picture, but his curly hair ended up looking more messy and just unkept. But I think with Curlos it turned out a little bit better. It's also where I started to come up with different poses and different things that he could be doing within the picture, because I honestly wasn't too sure what to have him doing. I thought about maybe having him play guitar or like a ukulele. You'll see in my sketches that I think he kind of looks a little bit like Steven Universe, just the whole vibe of he looks almost kind of round and his face is kind of round, and then he has curly hair. He's holding a ukulele, It kind of looked similar to Steven Universe, so I didn't want to do that. I thought about maybe having him hold drumsticks, just because in his house he does have a drum set. I thought maybe incorporating some sort of instrument would work, since he may have some experience playing instruments. But in the end, since I thought his house looked really warm and inviting, I thought maybe he should sort of represent that as well. So just having him kind of gesture over to his house like he's inviting you in and just, telling you to make yourself at home. I thought that would be a really good way to go about it. After I settled with what pose I was going to be doing, I tried drawing it from imagination, and like with most things that I draw from imagination, they always look very stiff and awkward, but I don't really let this bother me. It's more about just getting the initial idea down, and then eventually what I'll end up doing is lowering the opacity on that one layer and then just drawing over it, so you guys will be able to see sort of a natural progression. It still will look very awkward because I am still drawing out of my imagination, but in the final product I actually take out my body coon model and I take reference pictures of myself in sort of the same pose. That way I can pose the body coon model accordingly and just kind of use both pictures as reference to get the final look for him. As for the references, like I said, I used my body coon model and I also took reference pictures of myself. And as far as what I wanted Curlos to look like, I actually remembered that when I watched The Devil Wears Prada a few years back, that there was an actor named Adrian Grenier, I think is his name. I'll put a picture of him up on the screen. I kind of thought he had sort of the same features I wanted to incorporate within Curlos, and so I kind of used him sort of as a reference. I really wasn't trying to capture his likeness, but I thought, it's a really good jumping off point for someone, that actually exists. I do have another reference, but it has more to do with the furniture in front of Curlos' house. So once we get to that point, I'll share it with you. So with that being said, let's just go ahead and actually jump into the sketching phase. I actually recorded the sketching phase this time too, just so you guys can see the sort of natural progression of things and understand that it doesn't always turn out great the first time. I think it's really important to share that with you. So let's just go ahead and jump into that real quick. So here you can see I took my last refined sketch and I'm actually going to be drawing over it again, this time using the references I took of myself and also of the body coon model. I felt like the pose was very awkward looking, as they always are. I ended up finding out that I needed to tilt him back a little bit and just kind of understand that the pose he was in really wasn't all that natural to begin with. So you'll see me, work on that a little bit. And then afterwards, I'll just go into the face and just trying to, capture that same look I gave him within my sketches and maybe just kind of refine it a little bit more. And then again here, you'll just see me go over it yet again. So I hope you guys can see that this is really the point where you're going to want to experiment with a lot of things. You're going to want to, keep sketching, and if it's not working out for you, if the sketch isn't how you want it, then maybe you need to draw over it again and kind of get some references to kind of help you out a little bit. Doing it this way really does help, at least for me it does. And in the end, you can start to see that it starts to look like Curlos, how he's going to look like in the end. And I actually end up going over this sketch another time just to refine the hands and then maybe kind of fix a few things on the face. But afterwards, I call that sketch done and I actually just jump right into the line art process. So we'll get into that right now. And honestly, there isn't really too much to say about my line art process. I mean, I don't think there really ever is, but you can see here I'm trying to really get that sort of curliness in his hair. I always find curly hair to be challenging to ink just because it can go whichever way you want and there's just so many strands. And trying to figure out how to do that is kind of difficult for me. I think you might even see I kind of take a break from the hair and end up working on other things eventually. So don't feel bad if you're trying to ink something and if it doesn't come together. Usually if that ends up happening to me, I just move on to something else and just come back to it later. And I just want to go ahead and take the time to say that I do in fact trace the background and all of the pieces of furniture. I end up taking a picture of the character's house and then I'll just bring it into Sai, and when it comes time to actually work on the background, including the house and the furniture and all that stuff, I do just trace over everything. I do kind of try to add my own personal touch to things, just kind of change it a little bit. And you'll see that actually once I get to the Pinball Machine later on in the video. But I just kind of wanted to address that. I mean, I wanted to keep everything consistent. That's just kind of how I did it in the very first video with Dom. And like I said, I just want to keep all the pictures consistent. So, and I'm just trying to focus really on redesigning the character. So tracing the background isn't really a big deal for me. But anyway, you'll see that after I line everything else, I do go back into the hair and I try to finish that up. I figured since the light is going to be hitting his hair sort of on the top, like the sunlight, I probably wouldn't need as many lines there as I would maybe towards the bottom. So you'll see that kind of represented a little bit. After Curlos is done, I do move on to lining the pieces of furniture in the background. And this is actually where I brought in some other references. I tried to use the picture from the game, but because the file size is so small, when you scale it up, everything's really blurry. I ended up just searching on Google for different variations of these machines. So like there's the dartboard machine. I just looked up that and just tried to use that as a reference when it came to doing the line art process, and then the same thing with the pinball machine as well. And with the pinball machine, I will say that this is the one that I used another reference for. I actually designed the inside of the machine to look like that 90s pinball game that used to be on Windows. I think it was called Space Cadet. I'll put a picture on screen so you guys know what I'm talking about. But I tried to replicate it as best as I could just because there wasn't a whole lot of space within the machine itself, at least the way that I drew it. I ended up trying to mimic it a little bit, and then I just went on Google and looked at different pinball machines and just kind of how they were designed, and I just took little elements here and there of the ones that I liked, as well as using the pinball machine within the game as a reference too. So there's just a lot of, I guess, collaboration going on, a lot of different ideas from different places. And as far as everything else, it was pretty easy. I think until maybe I got to the foosball table. That one was kind of a little rough too, just because there's kind of almost like overlapping lines in a way, just because of the perspective. And I do think that maybe the foosball table isn't in perspective. It looks like it's kind of slanted too far down, almost like it's sloped. But I tried to fix it as best as I could, but like I said, I just kind of wanted to get this video out, and so sometimes we just kind of have to call it done, and just move on to the next one. You don't want to dwell on an artwork for a long period of time. At least I don't, especially since this video was basically due 4 weeks ago. But life happens, and we just got to move on. And after the furniture is done, I do go and start lining the house. I will say that because it is December here in, I guess, the Northern Hemisphere, there is snow on everything. And so when I took the initial picture, there was actually snow on the roof, and I couldn't see what the design underneath was. So I had to go onto the Animal Crossing wiki and look at Curlos' house, because I knew they have pictures of all the villagers' houses there. So I actually ended up just taking that picture. I brought it into Sai, and I just cropped out just the roof part, and I tried to make it match the picture that I had as best as I could. And I just I basically just kind of guessed what the design looked like. So this was the result. I don't think it looks too bad, honestly. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's relatively close to the game model. But that was just sort of another challenge. After I do the house, I do go on and make the horizontal lines for the floorboards, and I do try to incorporate some horizontal lines as well, just because when it comes to doing the floor in the coloring process, I always leave the floor for last because I have to add these vertical lines that are within perspective to make it look like wood paneling, and that's always my least favorite part. So I tried to plan ahead a little bit. And then afterwards, all that stuff is done. I knew I needed to go back and work on the dartboard some more and get in those like triangle type of lines. I did try to do it by hand and kind of make my own little angled guide. I don't really know what to call it, but I wasn't getting the same amount of little triangles that a real dartboard has. And so I was getting frustrated, and I literally just took a picture of a dartboard from Google and just literally pasted it in there, and I just basically traced it again. I figured I already have the circles and everything else. I can just trace the lines, because for whatever reason, I just couldn't get the same number of triangles when I was doing it manually, so we're doing the next best thing. And after the line art is done, I then go into the coloring process. I do try to start with the skin on Curlos, but as you'll see, I am having some trouble, and I think originally the colors I picked were maybe a little too contrasting, just because it does make him look a little weird looking. In the end, I didn't really like the colors I had picked originally, so I swapped to a different color palette that you can probably see, flashing here and there. I continue working on the face and the skin, and after I finish with the skin, I do move on to his facial hair. Most of the time with men, whenever they have facial hair, you can usually see a lot of stubble, and it's sort of like this almost gray area of where the facial hair is. And so I wanted to incorporate that into this drawing as well. So it did take a little bit of playing with. I think I kind of worked with it off and on as the picture kind of progressed until eventually I got it to obviously where it is now. And with this one as well, I wanted to experiment with adding lips. Like I explained in Stitch's video, I rarely ever add lips to characters, especially male characters, just because sometimes it can make them look like they're wearing lipstick, and obviously that's not my intention. So I tried it again here, ended up liking it, and it just ended up working out. His hair was actually pretty easy. Normally with when I start shading the hair, it's just a matter of adding a gradient of either a dark or a light color depending on what the lighting is, and then just kind of taking that same color and going in some of the darker places and adding in some highlights, some extra strands to make it look a little fuller. After that's all done, I do go in and start shading in his sweater. I believe the way I did it was actually just all on one layer, and I used a multiply layer. And I ended up having to change the shading color for each section of color, if that makes sense. Just because if you have one consistent color throughout, it may look good on one of those colors, but on the other two, it may look a little bit odd. And so I kind of had to, balance all that out. You might see me select the different sections of the color and kind of play with the hue and saturation and all that stuff, those little sliders, just to get the right color and make it look more realistic, I suppose. After I finish the shading, I actually take a texture and put it on the base layer. That way the entire sweater looks like it has this sort of fuzziness to it. After I finish shading his sweater, I move on to the shoes. You may notice that his pants are already shaded, and that's just an error on my part. I was recording the process of that, and I didn't realize I unintentionally paused the recording. I'm sorry about that. So like I said, we're just going to jump right into the shoes. And I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning when I was talking about Curlos' design, but when it came to figuring out like what his outfit would be, because he is a smug villager, and because smug villagers tend to be very kind of full of themselves, they always talk about, I think, like fashion and sort of, like they want to be actors and things like that. So I kind of thought maybe Curlos would have a pretty good fashion sense. And, most of the time I see models wearing like these sort of khaki jeans that are just high enough to show the ankles, if that makes sense. Well, I mean, you can see it in the picture. And then obviously wearing dress shoes. And so I just took those elements and just incorporated them into Curlos' design. And I really like the way it looks. I mean, I think he's very much dressed to impress. Bless his heart. I think shading those shoes did give me a little bit of trouble just because with dress shoes, they do tend to kind of have this weird sort of ombre effect where it's really dark. Some shoes are really dark on the very like tip of the shoe, and then they kind of fade out into this sort of lighter brown like you see in the picture. And like with the sweater, I do eventually add this sort of leather texture to the shoe. That way it can kind of look a little extra, I don't know, realistic. It gives it a little extra something, I suppose. After I finish coloring in Curlos, I just move on to the background, and I start with the more easier things, I think, with like the sky and the hedges. Those things tend to go really quickly. I did try something a little different with the hedges as well. I feel like I'm doing that like slowly in each video, but I think this is something that really kind of maybe put it over the top, I suppose. And then I do end up adding in that really bright green highlight. But I think what I ended up doing that kind of made it look even better was taking, I believe, my airbrush tool, or it might have been like a soft eraser, and kind of going over that shading color again and kind of erasing the parts on the top. That way they didn't look so harsh. After that, I move on to the house since it's the next thing that's in the foreground. I start by shading the roof, which I was going to shade in each panel kind of individually to kind of give it that sort of wooden tile kind of look, but I decided to select the entire row and then just shade in the bottom half. You guys will see what I mean once we get there, but I just do this for each section of the roof, and then I go back and add highlights and maybe add a few darker tones here and there. Honestly, it's not too complicated. I then go on to shade in the frame of the house, so sort of those like little wooden pieces that are there. And then afterwards, I go in and shade the actual like walls of the house. And something that I tried to do with this picture is actually use the photo that I took within the game and kind of recreate the shadows that are already within that picture, if that makes sense. And something I did kind of at the very end, I wasn't too sure if I wanted to include this or not, but Curlos' house does have this sort of wood paneling as well. And I didn't know if I want to take the time to really do all of that, but really it was just a matter of making one line and just duplicating it, so I thought why not? And I actually really like the way it turned out. I think it definitely adds, to the house as well. And from there, we just move on to the furniture. I think the easiest thing for me to do is probably the plant first. Honestly, there isn't too much to say about it. I tried my best to shade it as, realistically as I could. And then from there, I just went onto those little red stools since I thought those would be the next easiest thing. I end up moving on to the lava lamp, which I was kind of excited for because I knew I would have to add this sort of glowing effect to it. And before I got to that, I started to render out the sort of metal pieces and make it look like it was really shiny. And you'll see here eventually I do add in the sort of pinkish glow that the lava lamp has, and I think it looks pretty good. And then we move on to the foosball table, which I honestly thought was going to be a lot harder than it was. It really was more just tedious, if anything, just because there's just a lot of things that needed to be shaded. I just wanted to make sure that it looked like it was part of the same picture and it didn't look really weird or out of place. And then eventually after that, we move on to the pinball machine, which I think was actually the most fun thing that I colored on here, besides Curlos, because, designing an animal character into a human is, pretty awesome. But I was really proud of how the pinball machine turned out. I had to add a lot of glowing effects. You'll see me kind of give this really weird dot texture to the high score, explosion. I really wanted to make it look like it was made of pixels or something like that. And then you'll see me add a little leaf logo on the pinball machine just to kind of tie it into the whole Animal Crossing theme. You'll see me here draw the little space cadet thing that the machine was based off of. After I was done with that, I then move on to the dart machine, or I guess it's like a dartboard machine, whatever it is. And this one wasn't too bad. It was just a lot of little subtle shading things here and there. I then move on to the floor and kind of giving it this stone texture. I'll just kind of scribble little shapes here and there. I'll have to take that, transform it, and put it into perspective, and then from there I'll just refine each individual, stone, if you will. The very last few things to do are to add some shadows. Basically how I do this is I duplicate the line art layer and the color layer for all of the furniture, and I kind of merge everything together. And then you'll see me lock the transparency, and I'll take my shadow color that I want and I'll fill in everything. And so you'll see in the video that at one point all of the furniture may look gray. I'll then set that layer to multiply. I'll put it behind the actual color layer of the furniture. And then you'll see me select the pieces of furniture individually, and I'm selecting them on the shadow layer. And then once I select the furniture piece, I then transform it and I move it and warp it. That way it looks like it's a cast shadow. And then just for the last little bit of the shadow things, I do take that same shadow color and take my airbrush tool and kind of go underneath the objects to kind of blend them in and make it look more like they're a physical object within that background. And then finally, I think the last thing to do is to give him a little speech bubble. And like I've been saying in the video, I always thought that Curlos would be very warm and inviting and wanting you to come over. So I just had him say, "Make yourself at home." And then obviously I needed to include his little signature catchphrase, which was Shirley. After that, I just go ahead and sign it and I call it done. I definitely wasn't expecting this video to be put off for this long. I'm glad I can finally call it done and share with you guys the final results and everything. Like with most of my other videos, I do feel like this one is the best one yet, despite, everything that had happened with my little sort of hiatus there for a little bit. Like I said before, I am going to be doing a draw with me type of video to explain everything and what happened. It is kind of a crazy story, so, buckle up and get ready for that one. If you guys want to see the high-res version of this artwork, there will be a link below in my DeviantArt page for you guys to check out. And if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, then consider following me on Instagram. Anyway, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this very long, overdue video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I post new art videos every other Wednesday, so consider subscribing to the channel by clicking my logo on the screen or the subscribe button down below. If you'd like to further support this channel and me, you can buy me a Ko-fi in the link below, and anyone who donates gets a shout out at the end of my videos. Thanks, guys.